From the NIRSA Championship Series, this is Series Talk. I'm David Peters from Florida State University, joined as always by my good friend and colleague, Marty Dempsey from the University of Florida. Marty, how you doing?
Excited to be here, Dave.
Hey, today we're going to talk about the Social Justice Task Force in this special edition of Series Talk.
Yeah, Dave, in this summer, during our roundtable sessions that we had with our entire leadership crew, social justice was an important part to carve out a lot of time to be able to dive into. And from those early conversations, we said we need to involve more stakeholders within the series in this conversation, because sports is just a vehicle that brings us all together. And if we're going to be a safe and inclusive environment, we've got to make sure that we're a safe and inclusive environment for everybody. So in August, we set up this conversation. We engaged a lot of different stakeholders that came in. Many of them served as small group facilitators for us to just have a conversation about what are we doing well in the series and what do we need to improve on. So huge shout out to all of those that were involved in that. We had over 60 members that registered to be a part of that conversation. And from there, it was really to generate some themes about what is important to people so that we can move the conversation into action. And one of the first action moments was really to create this task force.
Well, and taking those themes that came out of that, the series said, hey, NSC board, we need a task force. And that was actually approved very quickly in September. The NSC board said, go ahead with that. Applications went out. The members were chosen in the month of September, and the work got started in October. So it's been fast. We want to keep this momentum going on social justice. Jasmine Holmes from Central Michigan University was named the chair. Myron Washington White from St. Cyril of Alexandria Catholic School in Arizona is our vice chair. And you can see on the screen now the number of different members are also joining to be part of the task force. To get the conversation started with our Social Justice Task Force, we've invited the chair. That's Jasmine Holmes from Central Michigan University to join us. Jasmine, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, let's just start with the significance of the NIRSA Championship Series and adding a Social Justice Task Force. What does that mean to you?
Absolutely. So I'd be remiss if I didn't first acknowledge the 20 intramural directors and 11 HBCUs that were represented at the first intramural summit on February 22nd, 1950 at Dillard University, and the foundation that has set for NIRSA to be able to thrive for so long. And so when we think about social justice, the history of NIRSA is so important because we came from an opportunity that wasn't available to everybody. So when Dr. William Watson created his own intramural program in 1948, after seeing a previous institution's intramural program, we know so much about how important social justice is to the foundation of NIRSA. And so adding a social justice task force confirms a front-facing effort to dismantle systemic oppression within the organization. And so I'm delighted that the championship series has made significant efforts, especially throughout the summer, to have those conversations and make efforts to continue the work to make the championship series and NIRSA a more safe and inclusive environment for everyone. And so now that we have an official group of people, we can push more person power toward some of those action items that we've created charges and goals for through our task force, to work towards equality and equity within the championship series, and to make sure that we're holding true to those promises for our stakeholders, but especially for those that feel underrepresented within NIRSA.
So take us behind the scenes as to what the early stages of this planning has looked like. We mentioned earlier that the task force has been meeting since October, so for a couple of months now. What have been the themes that have really developed through these early planning meetings and developing what our overall charges and goals are going to look like for this work?
Yeah, so we were actually given some initial themes, which I think helped us develop our own. And so over the summer, the championship series identified 4 major themes, and those included policy, financial barriers, stakeholder engagement, as well as staffing. And so from those, the task force was able to take those, mold them into something that we could make towards charges and goals. And some of those big ticket items that we decided to address, representation and partner opportunities with our small underfunded HBCU, HSIs, and schools that may not necessarily have the access to the events and tournaments that we put on. In addition, the implementation of social justice rubrics and questions for volunteer and host site applications. We're really looking forward to revamping those and making sure that any implicit bias is removed from within those applications. To increase diverse staffing, that's really important when you go to a tournament, or you go into an event and you see people that look like you, or that have similar ideas to you. In addition, collaboration with some sports committees and editorial boards to address gender policies and social justice for staff, volunteers, and participants. We do a lot of talking about, the effect on our athletes and our students, but we also have to make sure that the people that are putting on these events and volunteering for them are also being treated appropriately. And so I think these are just a few of the charges and goals that we've come up with as a task force. And we acknowledge that, this isn't going to encompass everything that our stakeholders are looking for, but we are working diligently and strategically in order to make the changes that we know will keep NIRSA true to its purpose, promise, principles, and priorities.
Well, one of those goals that you've already talked about has seen considerable movement already, and that's part of that application process that maybe some members have already seen as they've looked at some opportunities within the series. Can you talk about some of those changes that have already kind of been put into place with the application series in the championship series?
Absolutely. So what we realize with the applications is consistency is key. So a lot of times you have different people leading charges, you have different people leading committees and task forces. And we want to make sure that there's some consistency with how applications are reviewed and how staff are selected. And so a big shout out to the Student and Professional Development Committee, who began the work with addressing some of those inconsistencies within the application, and then partnering with us to make sure that we can include those social justice components to our application. And so starting out the Social Justice Task Force, making sure that the NIRSA EDI statement also aligns with the applications, or vice versa, in order to be consistent with the availability of the application for our stakeholders. In addition to that, we've come up with some social justice questions to include on these applications so that we can assess the written materials of those people that are interested in serving. In addition, this is a process that's going to be continued throughout, events and tournaments. And so making sure that somebody from social justice, or there's a social justice component in all staff selections. And so I think that's one of the big things that there were some concerns about. Well, just because you put a social justice question on an application doesn't mean it's going to have any value or hold any weight. And so really making sure that there's a rubric attached to that. And so there's somebody to hold accountable when decisions are made about staffing. And one of the things I'm most excited about, because there is a lot of discrepancy in people's ability to write, and so people might just have really good applications, is some of that coaching and education about NIRSA applications, and making sure people are knowledgeable about not only what the championship series is, but their opportunities to serve and be better volunteers within NIRSA.
The task force has also collaborated with the NIRSA Flag Football Editorial Board on the addition of a new inclusion and social justice statement in the newest edition of the rulebook. What is the significance of that initiative, and how important is it to involve our participants in creating that safe and inclusive environment that you had mentioned earlier?
Absolutely. This is definitely a step in the right direction. Flag football, especially mixed gender, is inherently one of our most challenging sports when addressing equity and equality. And so when we're working with the NIRSA Flag Football Editorial Board on social justice, that just allows and encourages our participants to have the support to challenge instances of discrimination and unfair treatment that they may see at events or tournaments. And be able to know that they're going to be backed by the board and the rules. And so when that information is included and it's written for everyone to see, there's an opportunity for us to hold people accountable when those things aren't upheld. And so I'm excited that this is not only a rule book that is used within NIRSA, but also some high school and other outside organizations use this. It's not going to be something that's only inter-organizational, but it's going to be something that's seen within our communities.
Jasmine, in the early stages of this task force, members have really been bringing awareness and discussion around current events and how they impact the series and collegiate recreation and higher education overall. But social justice reform is a journey. And so what have the early discussions been within the task force about the long-term plan for integrating this work into the fabric of both the series as well as into NIRSA?
This work is mandatory, and NIRSA as well as the championship series, we can't have mission statements, values, and or make promises that don't represent and positively impact all of our stakeholders. And so long term, we know that social justice is integral to the success of the organization. And we're suggesting, or will be suggesting, that it's a standing position within NIRSA and within the championship series. We know this work has to be done, and it can only be done when we have people doing the work. And so I'm confident that within the 2 years that I'm serving as the chair of the Social Justice Task Force, that the championship series in particular will create a space for social justice to be a standing and foundational part of the success of the organization.
Certainly a lot of work to come. Jasmine, we're going to put you on pause for a second because we have your vice chair in the waiting room. So we'll have Myron Washington White join us in just a sec to talk more about these topics, but we'll see you in a bit when we have some task force members join us for further conversation.
Fantastic. Thank you.
With more perspective on the work of the Social Justice Task Force, we welcome our vice chair, Myron Washington White. Myron is out now as the athletic director at St. Cyril of Alexandria Catholic School, but at some other institutions there in the state of Arizona. We're glad to have you here today, Myron.
Well, thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
Well, and you've been part of the series for quite a while. You know, those early years, really part of getting the foundation started for this series, handed off to some other great people, and now you're back. What about this opportunity has you engaged with the series again?
Honestly, guys, I was so intrigued by the youthful vigor that I saw and felt like maybe it would be a slight injection for me because I, for the most part, identify myself as the old guy with the group. So very appreciative of that part of it. And I was at Grand Canyon University for their basketball tournament. And it was just so nice, the seeing and the feeling of when we first started back in early 2000, and to see how engaged they were, not only with the participants themselves, but with the officials and the staff members and everybody who came down to actually promote and support the tournament itself. And so being totally selfish from my standpoint, I'm like, man, I got to get back into this. And luckily, the younger folks, as I would say, have welcomed me with open arms and appreciative of the knowledge that I bring and some of that institutional memory. So it's really good to feel good about what we started and where it is now. So they're doing a tremendous job and very appreciative of it.
You know, Myron, throughout your career, you have served both our association and higher education in a number of ways, including with the many different EDI initiatives that are out there. So how do you foresee the work that the Social Justice Task Force within the NIRSA Championship Series, how do you see that connecting with the many other EDI initiatives, both within NIRSA and higher education as a whole?
I think, honestly, Marty, you used the word connection. We're creating connectors. If I can look at it from a little bit more of a global perspective, there's been those ups and downs. I just think of it over my years of membership with the association, where things were highlighted with regards to social justice, equity, diversity, that type of thing. And we didn't necessarily use those words back in the day. You had descriptors like affirmative action, which aren't necessarily seen in a positive light moving forward where we are today. But the connectors are there and people are engaging in, I think, a very positive, meaningful way. And if you look at some of the information just coming from not only NIRSA HQ, but the membership in general, people want to feel good about what we do. And people want to feel like they're making a difference, not only in their community, but in our association and the world at large. And some of those things look like actually focusing in on what diversity, equity, and inclusion looks like. It's being comfortable with the identifiers that people are using, whether it's identity groups or infinity groups. It's being comfortable welcoming people into your space. And there's some of us that like the phrase, I'm going to meet you where you are, right? So if I'm able to meet Marty and Dave where they are, right? They've come a little piece, I've come a little piece, we meet in the middle, and we have a better understanding of what we bring to the table. Now, how that circles down to social justice with regards to the series, we're walking the walk and we're talking the talk, right? So we're having those expectations that, if I look at it from our participant standpoint, we're having those expectations that our participants come in open-minded, aware, open arms, engaging, involved with people that are participating in the tournament, regardless of how they self-identify. If you look at it from the professional colleague standpoint, based on the tournament directors, the facility people, and that type of thing, it's the same thing. I find it amazing. As an example, we're hosting in Western Oregon, right? And people from Arizona who haven't left the state of Arizona in their lifetime fly down to Western Oregon to participate in a Region 6 tournament, right? Now, if you've been to Western Oregon, you're like, oh my God, right? And so if you're someone that identifies of a different culture other than what you'll find in Western Oregon, it could potentially be a culture shock, right? But you get there and all of a sudden you realize it's a great place to play, right? This staff has totally welcomed me. I'm going to have a great time participating in this tournament. I'm going to walk away having connected with people, making friends, and been exposed to a different culture, a different ethnicity, just a different person in general. So I think if you wrap all that up in a nice package with a ribbon on it, that's what social justice is going to do for the championship series. We're going to create more connectors.
And certainly the committee for the last couple of months has been working on establishing the foundation for those connectors. What about the work that has already been completed by the task force to this date gets you really excited about the journey ahead?
Honestly, Marty, I think it's self-identification, right? If we are going to make drastic, dramatic change, not only where we stand, but where we live, and again, in the world, we have to take a deep dive, right? We have to understand what we bring to the table, excuse me, and what others bring to the table. And I think the good works and deeds that we're doing right now are allowing people to do that. As an example, if you look at the application, right, we've figured out a way for people to hopefully self-identify, right? So that gives us some data points to see if we are hitting our target market, our target audience, and if we're open and receptive to all cultures participating in the championship series. And then additionally, right, you ask that really awkward, uncomfortable question to see where people identify with social justice. Do the elements of social justice have meaning for you as a career professional while you are participating in or directing our tournaments, right? Because again, if we look at the collective, right, we want those open-minded people involved in what we do, because those open-minded people are then going to go back to their campus and the NIRSA tentacles are going to spread, right? And all of a sudden, those healthy interactions that we're having on our campuses now take on that social justice component that in itself adds to the healthy perspective that we want our participants and our professional membership to have.
Well, Myron, we're so glad that you're one of the people with us on the series, helping to provide some coaching, provide that wealth of knowledge, and help us make those connections. Myron, thanks so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you guys for having me. I enjoyed it.
To talk more, we've invited some task force members to join us, so welcome back to Jasmine. But we also have with us today Nick D'Amato from the University of Massachusetts Amherst, Shana Kessler from Central Washington University, and Chris Newsom from the University of South Florida. Welcome to you all.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We thought we'd start with a question just about what it means personally and professionally to be part of this work of the Social Justice Task Force.
Well, if it's all right, I'll speak first. For me, this has very important. I've been actually in conversations with folks in my department as we're talking about Strengths Quest, and one of the things we were talking about is our strengths related to how we are helping the success of our department. And the one I shared was with my connectedness and relator. And for me, on Thursday, June 11th, my department held a impromptu all-staff meeting to discuss the things that were going on related to George Floyd, to talk about Breonna Taylor, to talk about Ahmaud Arbery. And for our department at that time, there were only 2 Black people in our department, and that's myself and my spouse. And it was very interesting because we were actually on vacation the day of the meeting, but we were excited that the director felt so moved to actually have this conversation, to not just talk about racism and systemic oppression and all these things, but to find out how the staff feels about it and what their reactions were. And so for us, my spouse and myself, we joined onto the call, even though we were on vacation. And it was beautiful to see people that don't look like me talk about this, like to feel safe and comfortable and vulnerable and share stories. And so to me, this has a powerful and lasting impact if done right, when we have these type of conversations, and then when we take these conversations and put them into action. And so to be a part of this committee, this task force, to help NIRSA as a greater entity to strive for positive changes for all types of diversity, not just related to Black people, but everyone, right? Anyone that's considered a minority or is being oppressed, we want to help as a leader in campus recreation, and quite frankly, in just being really good people. Because when I go to the conferences, I just run across good people. And so we as good people want to do good things. So what can we do? And I think that's one of the biggest things about this task force. So personally and professionally, it combines for me, what can we do to help others? And then hopefully those other people continue to help the next generation. So create lasting positive changes to this world.
Yeah, I think for me personally, I've been lucky over the course of my life to learn about things like systemic racism, oppression, social justice, privilege. You know, unlike so many others, and like Chris alluded to, seeing what's happened to our country over these last little bit, and the reactions to the killings of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and all the social movements that popped up around that, I was really inspired to, how can I do more? But also, I think importantly, how can we make this a sustainable effort and not just a reaction to these horrible things as they happen? One of the things that I really found is, not all of us are lawyers. We can't go into courtrooms. We may not be able to lead marches. In the time of COVID, we may not even be able to participate in some of these things. But I think if we can all, do our part to impact our own little world, and for me, that's certainly NIRSA and our campus here in Amherst. I think that if we can all take on that challenge to just make our world a little bit better and a little bit more focused on these things, I think that's how we create this into a really sustainable movement that hopefully will have some real accomplishments down the line. Professionally, anytime you get to serve NIRSA, an organization which has done so much for me personally and professionally, it's an opportunity you can't pass up. And especially when it comes to the important work of social justice, I really, really am glad that I'm getting to participate in this.
For me, I think back to my very first professional job straight out of undergrad, and that was the year that Mike Brown was killed in Ferguson. And I didn't sleep for 3 days following everything that was happening over there. And I remember feeling very helpless that I couldn't do something more. And that was when I decided that I had to find a way to be more intentional with my work, to bridge these things that were important to me and important to our society, to find a way to bring social justice into the work that we're doing. Because I looked around at the students on the campus I worked at and saw so many of them just oblivious to what was happening because it was too far away or it wasn't public enough or whatever the reason. And then for the couple of students of color that were on that campus, that they felt like they had no place to speak about it and to be their authentic selves. And a whole lot happened within that 6-month period after that. And so that became something that I shifted into my work as a grad student and then into every position since, to make sure that I am being very intentional to check on my students of color, that I am aware of what's happening in the world and the impacts that these things have, whether it's in our backyards or 3,000 miles away. So this task force is a really great way to start to bring that opportunity forward for other professionals.
One thing that, you know, has been really awesome to hear throughout the beginning stages of this task force is those personal connections that each one of our task force members, you know, that genuine personal connection that they have with this work, and that they all share this common bond that they want to move the conversation really into action pieces on behalf of the whole NIRSA Championship Series. One of the early ways that they have looked at doing this is through the application process, to make sure that we're reducing barriers and getting more and more people involved within the championship series. Jasmine and Myram spoke a little bit earlier about the questions on the volunteer application itself, but Nick, I'll direct this one to you. Can you tell us a little bit about the conversation that's currently being about having a social justice component as part of the overall selection process once those volunteers have applied through the application online?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think we have to be honest with ourselves that issues of social justice occur at our events. You know, whether that's who's able and eligible to participate, you know, incidents of bias, both conscious and unconscious, and issues that can pop up during our games. You know, one of the things we've talked about is using case plays from actual NIRSA events to talk about these things with our officials. You know, these things really happen. And I think it's really important that host sites and tournament directors are able to kind of know where their volunteer staff are at in terms of, you know, their knowledge and their competency in social justice, you know, as well as their desire to bring a focus on social justice to these events. You know, in order for our events to be the best that they can be and have the impact that I think we as people who've experienced them know that they can have, we have to address issues of social justice head on and be prepared to have some really difficult and really challenging conversations throughout the event. I think the other thing that Marty touched on that's really important is representation matters. You know, we can throw the best events in the world and have the best host sites and the best officials committees, but if folks don't look up and see people that look like them in the room, whether that's volunteers, officials, committees, whatever, they're going to wonder if you know, NIRSA really is a place that's welcoming to them. You know, and in terms of trying to bring the best people into our profession and really get our name out there and what we're all about, these events are really the first and the biggest touch point for a lot of folks with NIRSA. So I think it's really important that they see in a real way that people like them are involved in this and that they're welcome in our profession and at our events.
Some of the conversation this year surrounding social justice really took hold with our social justice virtual roundtable back in the month of August. And part of the themes, or some of the themes that came out of that, were barriers to access and participation. And so, Chris, I'll direct this one to you. Can you discuss some of the ways, or the importance at least, of expanding the footprint of the championship series, and some of the ways that the task force thinks that it can have a positive impact to achieving that goal?
Thank you. For us, we've been talking about quite a few options related to expanding the access to participation, especially when you look at historically Black colleges and universities, junior colleges, and other small institutions. So, you know, one simple thing is, if you're a large institution near one of these smaller institutions, no matter who they are, maybe when you're going to a regional tournament, you reach out to that smaller institution, say, hey, we have some spare seats, or we have an extra van. Can we stop by and pick up some of your student athletes, or pick up some of your officials or some of your staff members that are interested in going? Because transportation is a big block hurdle for some of the people that want to go. And so just that alone helps. Also, some of the schools don't know about these things. So if the larger schools are reaching out to these smaller schools, they're now becoming aware of these opportunities. We've also talked about how it is difficult to find a point of contact at some of those different institutions. So just like I just talked about with the awareness, if we don't know who to reach out to, it's very difficult for us to say, hey, we're having this tournament over in Orlando, or we're having this tournament over in Round Rock, or wherever it may be. So once we are able to start to establish those connections, those contacts, then it makes it a little bit easier. We've also talked about possibly creating sponsorships, maybe through the hotels that are the host hotels for the events. Because once again, that's related to travel. So if they can give a one spare room, because once again, we're booking a whole block of rooms, and they usually give a few extra rooms to those host sites. Like, hey, can we just get one more extra room so that we can donate it to this club or this team that is coming from a smaller institution? And that extra 300, 500, whatever amount of money it is a big savings for that institution that would really love to have those students go. And once again, even if it's not students playing in the tournament, if they have officials or someone that wants to serve on the committee, we should definitely find a way to provide them that access, that opportunity, that ride to get there. So it's just working on creating those connections, whether it's through those type of sponsorships. And we also talked about possibly creating larger sponsorships. Imagine for like our basketball regional tournaments or even the national tournament, reaching out to the NBA and WNBA to see, hey, would you be willing to sponsor this, that, and the other, and come and speak on social justice? Because that is really big on within both of those associations at the moment. So like have some of their folks come talk about social justice, but at the same time, maybe they give back to the NCS and provide some funds that could be donated to those smaller schools that want to travel, or to teams to cover registration costs. So once again, we're in the talks of different things, and now it's just trying to figure out how we can make these discussions become actual actions.
Switching gears just a little bit, we know that social justice work is it's broad, it's difficult work, it has a lot of complexities to it, and that within each one of us, there are many dimensions to each one of our identities. And while at times we may focus on one particular aspect of our identity over others, for instance, we've talked a lot already today about, that this summer really focused on the racial inequality that's in the world, and that became a prominent piece. But within the NIRSA Championship Series, especially, gender has come into play, along with race, along with the socioeconomic stat. Like there's a lot of different areas to that. So we really don't need to not forget about that intersectionality, right? And how that collectively affects all of our experiences. So Shayna, directed to you, how can we apply this concept of intersectionality to advocate for all members of all identities within the NIRSA Championship Series?
I think when it comes to intersectionality, we have to be very unafraid to make mistakes and to recognize that we all have our own internal biases, whether they're implicit or explicit, recognize them, work through them, so that we can have the opportunity to see the whole person that's standing before us or presenting before us. Part of that process is going to be painful, and it's going to be emotional, and it means having to get over that feeling of needing to defend yourself when you make a mistake, and instead listen to what the other person has to say. Because if we say something or do something that makes a person feel like something about who they are has been overlooked or sidestepped, there's nothing we can do about that. We have to acknowledge that those person's feelings are valid, and we have to then make steps to correct it and hopefully not repeat those mistakes again. So we have to be ready and willing as professionals working with students who have rapidly changing and evolving identities as they learn more about themselves as young adults in college, that it's okay for us to make mistakes, provided that we take those opportunities to learn about them. So advocating for ourselves is the first step, being our authentic selves, being open about who we are. People are often afraid to talk about these subjects because they're sensitive matters, so we have to bring it to the forefront, and be nuanced about it and be ready to learn from it and demonstrate to others how this can be helpful moving forward.
Well, and just listening to the conversation so far, we have just so many different perspectives on the task force, but I imagine also right now listening to this conversation on Series Talk, we have stakeholders who would like to contribute. The question to the entire group is, what ways would you like to hear from our stakeholders? How can they be involved?
If I may, I would like to try to answer that real quick for me. I hope people don't take this moment in time for granted. And I also hope people understand that it's more than just a moment in time. So if you're doing stuff now, keep doing stuff, because we can't stop. Like, it won't change overnight. It's a continual process, and we need people that have passion and energy to keep fighting, keep working towards our better selves for these changes in systemic racist policies. And once again, we want to make sure we're reaching out to others. I know for me, for instance, in the state of Florida, there's a college called Beacon College where there are high-level students who have learning disabilities, but they're amazing students. And I happen to have the privilege of learning about their program and seeing them go to a regional basketball tournament. And so from there, I was like, hey, our flag football team at USF is hosting a small tournament. You're more than welcome to join us. And they came down and they played and things of that nature, right? So let's continue to use our connections and build upon those. Be inclusive of one another, use inclusive language. Once again, it's a huge highway of things we can do in this fight for social justice. And I do not expect everyone to be in every lane of that highway, but you can pick a lane to be in. So if it's donating money to a fund, great. If it's actually protesting, as Nick was talking about earlier, great. If it's writing to your congressperson, great. Find something for you that will keep your energy and passion up and keep the fight going, because it's not over after today or after this year. Like, it's gonna keep happening. Things are bad things are going to continue to happen, but I hope more good things happen than bad things. And that's why we need everyone to keep at it.
Yeah, I think for me, in terms of members, reaching out to the task force, that's exactly what it is. Reach out. One of the things that consistently comes up during our conversations as a task force is none of us are perfect. None of us know everything. Shayna talked a lot about mistakes are going to be made along the way. And that includes by us as a task force, as individuals, as an organization. So if something that we do, you think it can be improved, or it's not going to have the impact that we want it to, reach out. If something's working really well on your campus and you want to share that with us, reach out. Shayna talked about having a lot of identities. If you think that there's a particular identity or angle or perspective that's missing, share that with us. None of us are perfect, but we're on this task force because, as Marty said, we really have passion for this and we really want to contribute. And we're only going to do that through the feedback of everybody. It's not just going to be us.
To add to that, what we do in our work and in our daily lives is one part of how we can contribute to this process. There's also things that we can do within our communities at large, within the places that we reside in, right? We're part of a campus culture and a campus community. For each of us, we're part of the larger community in which our campuses exist, and beyond that. So finding those ways to examine the role that you play in each level of your community and how you can make an impact there. Because as Chris said, there's no wrong way to be an advocate and an activist for social justice and systemic change. So the signing petitions is a small thing that you can do that makes a difference. And when you can be on the ground at a protest, that's another thing that you can do, but that's not always an option for everybody. So recognizing there's no one right way to do it, but that there are enormous opportunities where small actions can make a big change.
On behalf of all of us here at Series Talk, Nick, Chris, Shayna, Jasmine, thanks for joining, and Myron, who was here a bit earlier. Thanks for joining us today. We look forward to the continued work throughout this year and into 2022 as the task force will continue all the way through May. So plenty of time to provide feedback to this group and for us to get some actions going. All right, it's time to wrap things up, and we still have with us Jasmine Holmes, the chair of the Social Justice Task Force. And Jasmine, we just had some great members of your task force join us, and there are others as well that we mentioned earlier. What are you looking forward to this year as part of the task force's work?
Yeah, first, I just want to say I'm extremely proud and excited for the people that have been chosen to serve on the Social Justice Task Force. We've compiled a group that is motivated and excited about the work being done. And I think everybody has, their own motives for social justice, whether in their personal or professional lives, but have been able to come together to create something that's going to be lasting and positive for the success of NIRSA and the championship series. And so when you ask about, 2021, the thing I'm looking forward to is putting some of these ideas into action and having them be something that we can work from in the years to come.
Well, thank you, Jasmine, for your leadership. That should certainly not be overlooked. We look forward to the long journey that is ahead of us here. and look forward to more updates coming soon from the Social Justice Task Force.
Just one more thing to remind folks, if you're watching today about, certainly we have our task force. We've talked about ways you can contribute to their work, but you can also be part of some of our work teams and the executive board by applying in the process is going on right now. Marty, some deadlines are coming up for the series applications for those positions. When are those?
Yeah, it is time to replace me on the executive board. So if the executive team work, that leadership track, which is a 3-year term, is of interest to you, those applications are coming up real soon, January the 14th to apply. And then if you would like to be a work team chair or just a work team member, all of those applications are due on February the 10th. And you can find all of that information out right on the NIRSA Play website. Dave?
And you can catch us again. The next series talk will be out in the month of February. So if you'll join us for that. Jasmine, thanks for joining. To Myra, to the rest of our work team, task force members who joined us today, and to Marty, I'm Dave Peters. Thanks for being here for Series Talk. Series Talk is a production of NIRSA, Leaders in Collegiate Recreation.